Good morning, and welcome to a special draft day episode of Bitches Love Sports. I'm your host, Jazz Monet, and I'm gonna make this relatively quick. This will be somewhat of a watch along of parts of the press conference from Tuesday. Unless you've been under a rock, you kind of know that there was a press conference with Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones, and Mike McCarthy on Tuesday that had Cowboys Nation all abuzz. So we are going to talk about that. Um, we're going to get into that in a second, but I am going to start off with shout outs and call outs, and then we'll kind of get into that press conference, which I did have to cut down a little bit, both because of time and also because of just there were certain things that I felt like it was important to really hone in on, while there's other things I'm like, they might come up later, but we'll worry about that when it happens. Um, Thanks for everybody who's tuning in already. Shout out to Clement. I see your comments. I'm gonna get to those after shout outs and call outs. Eastside Herald, I'm you and these pet names. So we already discussed don't call me baby. I think I might have to make Boo off limits too, but I don't know. I'll decide. I'll let you know by the end of the show. Thank you, J Money. Thank you for handling that. Um, So yeah, quick shout outs and call outs. I'm gonna make these quick because a lot of these things I'm gonna end up going over again at some point in the next few weeks as we have more time to dive into them. But just off the top of my head, I definitely want to shout out Sue Bird for the ownership of the Seattle Storm, or being part of the ownership group, I should say. I think that says a lot about how legacy WNBA players can come in and impact the current WNBA, especially when it comes to things like how ownership interacts with the teams. Like a lot of the headlines related to things like their pay, certain privileges in terms of flights and things of that nature. A lot of that has to do with the CBA, not just the support or viewership that the WNBA may or may not be getting. So I think having players going into ownership, especially while it's still at a point where that's feasible, right? Because we've seen, for example, in the NFL, where with some sports, it gets to a point where it's just not feasible for most people, even if you did make a good living for yourself. It's not feasible for most people to be like, I'm going to own a team. So right now, we're still at a point where a lot of the former WNBA players who were able to make a good living, who are in a financial position to do so, can feasibly be like, yes, I'm going to own a team or go into an ownership group. And it puts them in a place to impact the W in a positive way and also make some of the changes and spread some of the information that they wish would have happened when they were players. So shout out to Sue Bird for doing that. Shout out to Reggie Bush for getting his Heisman back, and I'll probably go into that more later because I'm a big Reggie Bush fan. For those who didn't know, his time was kind of over by the time I started this podcast. But like when I first started getting into football, I was a big Reggie Bush fan, and when everything happened and his Heisman got taken away, um, I was really disappointed. Not only because I felt like the reasons why they took it away had nothing to do with what he did to earn the Heisman, but also because I felt like he was such a good representative of what it meant to be a Heisman winner and what characteristics you needed in order to earn a Heisman. So I'm glad that he'll be back into that family. And you know the commercials where it shows all the players like living in the Heisman house together. I'm really looking forward to whatever they end up doing to welcome him back into the Heisman house. I think that's gonna be dope. Um, and let's see what else. I want to call out the people on my last video. So my last video, a lot of it was about the WNBA, and I was really hoping that fans of a certain player weren't a bunch of ignorant racists. Now, when it comes to the comments on my video, the sample size is relatively small, so I'm not going to pretend like her entire fan base is that way. But I have people jumping in my comments talking about nobody knows who Asia Wilson is. Nah, dude, you don't know who Asia Wilson is because you care about one player and maybe that player's team now. And that's fine. Like, getting into a new league or a new sport because you're a fan of the player, it's totally fine. If anybody supports that, I do. However, don't come in as a new fan and start telling people that they're wrong for being a fan of a player who was making big moves in the WNBA before your player. I mean, your player still hasn't even gotten there. So you don't care about Asia Wilson, you don't have to. But like, leave Asia Wilson fans alone and stop acting like you actually know the sport. Um, And all the other stuff we'll get to at some point later, because, oh boy. Um, who else? Quick shout out to my dad. Yesterday was his birthday. That's probably another reason why it was hard for me to go live last night. Like, yes, Wednesdays are a long day for me, but also I think I just had a lot on my heart and mind. If you've been watching for a while, you know the role that my dad played in helping me launch this podcast before he passed away. And the support that he had for not only me, but also the name of the podcast and the way that I was going about it. He played a big role in encouraging and motivating me to make this happen. So, um, of course, he's gone, but never forgotten, not for a single day. And it was funny. I was talking to one of my cousins yesterday, and he was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna light some incense for your dad." Which, first of all, shout out to my cuz, because a lot of people in my generation either don't observe or have forgotten about those traditions whenever it comes to honoring our ancestors. So he was like, "I'm gonna light some incense for your dad," and I was like, "Cause I've been busting my ass all day. I'm just now getting a chance to sit down and figure out a way to honor him before the day is over." And he was like, "You know what? Honestly, working hard is probably the best way to pay tribute to that man." So that's what I did yesterday. I worked a lot and thought about my dad, and I started on the show notes that we're going to go over today, but I started falling asleep while I was doing the show notes, and that's when I knew that show wasn't happening last night. Um, so yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other shout outs or call outs I'm missing. Shout out to the Cincinnati Bengals, because every time I feel like the Cowboys are just doing terrible, they one up us. When we weren't doing anything in free agency, I looked across the league and I was like, you know what? At least we don't have four quarterbacks for no reason. And then with the press conference that happened the other day, I was just like, man, in terms of building a roster, things aren't necessarily going how I'd like to see them go as a fan. And then you look up on Twitter and it's like, oh, there are Bengals who are like, you know what? I forget talks not going well or not going far enough. They're not happening. And somebody get me the fuck out of here. Um, so shout out, or maybe that's a call out to the Cincinnati Bengals. But shout out to them for reminding me that the grass is not always greener on the other side. So on that note, I'm gonna read some of the comments that y'all have already left, because Clement has had a lot to say. And if I think of any other shout outs or call outs before, oh, actually a couple of more quick shout outs. One, I want to shout out the people who keep asking me draft questions. So this is my third year doing this podcast, right? Once July hits, I will have officially hit 3 years, you know. And my first year, I didn't pay attention to the NFL draft at all. After the draft happened, I talked about who was drafted, where they went, if there was anything significant, like if anything suggested any significant changes for any teams, and that was it. And then last year was when I started participating in some of the spaces, trying to understand what it even meant to keep up with the draft and keep up with the players, to watch film, to see how many players I could watch, take down names, organize my notes, stuff like that. That was like my first time even trying to do it. And the shit is time consuming. And if you know anything about my life, you know, the last thing I need is another time consuming hobby, right? And so this year, I was like, okay, I'm going to try again, and I'm going to try to do it a little bit more. And I think in that I succeeded, but definitely not enough to where I feel people should be coming to me for draft answers and draft information. But some of you still do. And even though it makes me nervous and puts me on the spot, one, it helps me kind of, I guess, monitor my progress in terms of my comfort with certain questions and my ability to answer them. A lot, sometimes even without Googling, I'm like, yes. Um, and two, I guess it just makes me feel good that I've either been put in a category in your mind or associated with certain people, or just you think I'm smart enough and knowledgeable enough and know the game enough to be able to answer these questions, and you actually trust my answer. So shout out to all you people who, like I said, even though y'all make me nervous, I appreciate the questions. And also shout out to the people who I've been meeting with regularly, talking to, especially the people who I've been meeting with weekly, or we be trying to meet weekly and talk about the draft, right? Um, Yes, a lot of those conversations have gotten derailed during the offseason because of Cowboys bullshit. But if it weren't for y'all, and you know who you are, I probably wouldn't have done nearly as good of a job of keeping up with the draft as I did do. And I didn't do as good as I wanted to do. But having you guys to talk to and bounce ideas off of has really made a difference. And I honestly look forward to us continue these conversations throughout the season. So shout out to y'all. Now, on that note, I'm going to get to some of these comments real quick before we start breaking down this press conference. So Clement says, Clement started talking before I even went live, y'all. Clement says, the fan base is discouraged because the team is moving very slow when it comes to negotiating contract extensions with Prescott, Lamb, and Parsons, naturally. Not to mention, the owner and president of the team, Jerry Jones, was saying that this upcoming season that we are all in with this team. I want him to stop saying that so much. But proceeds to let Tony Pollard, France Armstrong, Stephon, I don't know, where's your next one? Gilmore, walk into free agency, and we are relying on this draft class and second-year players to contribute this season. And finally, we are tired of the front office not being serious about winning. I think that's all valid. And when it comes to the surface view of why fans are frustrated, yeah, all those things definitely apply. And I would actually say that after watching the press conference, so the thing about press conferences is the purpose of them is supposed to be to inform people, to respond to questions and concerns that you know are floating out there, or maybe even to make announcements. And while I do think the Joneses responded, I hope they didn't intend to get the reaction that they actually elicited from the fan base. JV, hey JV, how's it going? JV says, Jazz, the very next time you communicate with Wild Nation Sports, which should be tonight, please ask him about the one and only time Lisa and Harold called into his podcast. Okay, I'll ask about that. I don't think I was watching that day, but I'll ask about that. And there's thanks for everybody who's being active in the chat. I'm gonna read one more. Willie says, what's good, Jazz? It's draft day. With that being said, Jerry needs to be quiet. Every time he talks, nothing good comes out of it. I think it might serve Jerry Jones to maybe find a better way to communicate his message to the fan base. I think I understand what he's trying to do and what he's trying to say. But I don't think his attempts to explain things are being received as he or anyone in the organization intends it. Eastside Herald says, Texans don't have a first rounder, but we don't need one. Texans have done very well in the offseason. Congratulations, Eastside. All right, so on that note, let's go ahead and get into the press conference. Like I said, we're going to skip around a little bit. We're going to start at the beginning because honestly, from the very beginning is where you start seeing some of the most interesting interactions between Jerry Jones and the press. So let me go ahead and pull this up and we'll get into it. Make sure we can hear.
Sure. David Moore, Dallas Morning News. This question's for Jerry and Steven. With the free agent attrition you've had this offseason and the gap you currently have between your third pick before you're on the clock again, does that place even more of a premium on needing an immediate return on your first three picks in this draft, more so than usual in most drafts?
Go ahead, Steve.
I think, in general, if you look at attrition, if you talk about probably where it hits us the hardest is, the guys we lost, obviously, in the offensive line. We've had that happen before with Connor Williams and Connor McGovern. These are guys that we picked, and then you plug them in, and they play, and then they get awarded a great contract. Unfortunately, you can't, have more than one, a couple offensive linemen that make a lot of money on your offensive line. And
okay, so I'm going to pause right there because honestly, Stephen Jones's answer started off pretty well, right? So the question was from David Moore, and he asked about free agent attrition and he asked about attrition of veterans and basically how that impacted the need for the draft picks to come in and make an impact immediately. And Stephen Jones, first thing he mentions is the O-line. That's a reasonable concern. He talks about how they've been hit hardest on the O-line. Okay, totally reasonable. But then he starts to get into these comments about, okay, you can't have, you can only have so many, make so much money. And as soon as I heard that, I was like, I don't think that was part of the question, but I was like, let me just keep listening and see where he's going with this. And unfortunately, and y'all can correct me if I'm wrong. That's why I like doing these live. I want to see what y'all say in the comments. But unfortunately, he kind of just kept going down this path of talking about free agency and talking about the salary cap, which really didn't have anything to do with the question. So let's keep going.
You certainly, want those young guys coming. So whether it's the three guys we've picked the last three drafts, Ball and certainly Awesome Richards and Waletzko, TJ Bass, all those guys are, it's time for them to step up. Obviously, TJ played a lot last year, and we really liked what we saw there. You move on to Dorrance Armstrong. You have Sam Williams, who's certainly shown a lot and certainly been frustrated with his play time on – frustrated is probably not a fair word, but would like to play more. And we think a lot of him, and he needs to step up. And then, of course, the running back situation is one, that we're continue to address. And obviously we will look at it in the draft, but also looking at, Pollard in terms of replacing losing him. We've got to work through that. But those are all things that require young people to step up. And we've had a good track record. As I mentioned, Connor Williams, Connor McGovern stepping up. Obviously, Tolbert, it took him a year, but stepped up and played really well, and I think he'll take it to another level this year. Certainly Mike can speak to that.
So he kind of got it back on track, right? So he started talking about how they got hit hardest on the O-line, then went into this, sort of segue into how much people get paid, and then got back on track of other positions where we've lost players, where the Cowboys have lost players, and what he expects in terms of who's going to step up. So to answer David Moore's question about the need for draft picks to step up, Stephen Jones is basically saying like, hey, we've got guys currently on the roster that we need to step up and that we expect to step up. Totally fine with that answer. But the small segue into and out of discussing how much offensive linemen get paid, in hindsight, I think that was our first clue about where this press conference was going to go.
And I'll also add to that, candidly, without any way being defensive, we're very proud of our personnel, very proud of this roster. Very much think this roster, without knowing right now how much the rookies are going to contribute, we're very, very feel good about the promise of the team that we're going to have this year with this roster. And I do, principally because of what Stephen said. We will have young players step up, no names that become names, because names have left and are off the roster, and so those guys have got to step up. You cannot play and run a team in the NFL without counting on this dynamic going on. And so we do feel good about these guys coming in. Is it ambiguous? Of course it is. It's ambiguous if you had a veteran out there, he could get hurt in training camp and you not have him again. So we're in an ambiguous business when it comes to projecting. But to answer your question, I think I'm answering it. But the question is, in my mind, about all of this, how do we feel about where we've been in this free agency? We feel great about what we've been in.
So I'm pausing there because he says the question in my mind is, how do we feel about this free agency? That was not the question. And I think had he kind of connected it more to what players they expected to get, or talked about why they maybe were looking more forward to the draft and their own roster as opposed to free agency, and left it there, I think it would have been fine. But also in hindsight, his comment about to not, like when he said, I'm not being defensive at all, or to not be defensive at all, and he goes on with his answer, that was also a little bit of foreshadowing that he and Steven were about to give some very defensive answers continuing on. So at this point, we're about 3.5 minutes into the press conference. Only one question's been answered, or only one question has been asked, but they're not nearly done.
Free agency, all in, all in, all in. We're all in with these young guys coming on. And we're all in with this draft. And we're all in with knowing that you have to go. You can't have, we've had adjustments. We talk about, I saw some criticism someplace about Zeke and about paying Zeke. Do I need to raise a hands in this room of everybody that thought Zeke should?
I'm pausing there because my 2 cents said all in our feelings. And I think that's very accurate. So let's go back to the question. The question was about attrition. And hold on, I wrote it down just to make sure I didn't forget it. The question was about attrition and how that impacted the expectations of new players and their draft picks. And now we've heard a segue from Stephen Jones into talking about how much offensive linemen are getting paid. We've heard Jerry say, he's not being defensive, but he completely changed the question to something that was more relevant to him, which, in case you're a person who's never gotten in a lot of heated discussions or arguments with a person, that is a key indicator of someone being defensive, because they're bringing up something that you may not have even asked about because they feel like they need to protect themselves and how they may be perceived related to that topic. So even though Jerry Jones was asked about attrition and about draft picks, he's like, let me go ahead and address this free agency question that you haven't asked yet early, right? And so now we've gone from talking about attrition and draft picks to now we're talking about Ezekiel Elliott, who is not even here. Nobody asked about Ezekiel Elliott. So what does that tell you? For whatever reason, that situation is on the minds of the people in the front office right now. And as we continue with this press conference, I think we're going to see a little bit more about why that situation is on their minds. But let's keep going.
Be on this football team when he had him, when he was holding out. But we had to adjust the contract, which took away from money that could have gone to Tyron. We had to adjust that contract and give it to Zeke, which Zeke deserves it, because we all thought Zeke was going to be the main ingredient for our success over the ensuing years. Since that time, this cap thing has really become even more, not just for the Cowboys, but for the league. And, of course, you've seen a little diminished or not interest, but diminished emphasis in the cap in the running back area. And what diminishes it is availability. Availability because there are others that can carry the ball better than others that maybe be able to block at left tackle or those type things. So, again, without sounding defensive at all.
Once again, he sounds very defensive in my opinion, but I'm going to give y'all a little bit more insight based on what I'm saying in a second.
The youth, the young guys coming in here and playing are incrementally viable. We're counting on them. And we've had that happen for us, and we've counted on them.
That being said,
all right, before we get into the next question, let me dive a little bit more into what I'm hearing here and why I think that happened, where they went from talking about attrition to talking about contracts and free agency. So to a lot of fans, we might have had a similar question. Like, okay, not even thinking about money, contracts, free agency. We know we've lost some people. So the people, and this is the question that has come up, the people that we're drafting, are we expecting these draft picks to come in and make an impact, right? Because for some teams, they might expect that from their first round pick, right? Especially the ones that are higher up in the first round. We've been hearing all off season about these teams that are going to need a quarterback that can come in and be expected to start, right? So there are some teams who will expect that from their first round pick. But if you're desperate enough, maybe you expect that from your first, second, third. In the Cowboys' case, we might actually, in some people's minds, be going into the 5th round of the draft, hoping to find someone that can make an immediate impact on the team. And so that was my perception of the question. However, what I'm reading from the Joneses is that when the word attrition comes up, attrition meaning players who have left, I think their mind instantly goes to contracts. I think for them, the reason why those players left was because they couldn't get on the same page in terms of money and details of those deals. So even though it was a completely different question being asked, there's no way to bring up that topic to the Joneses without them being triggered in terms of some of the discussions and some of the things they've experienced with these deals. I don't know that for a fact, but to me, that explains why the deals kept coming up, why free agency kept coming up, why contracts kept coming up, even though definitely in the beginning, questions were being asked about the draft and about expectations for drafted players. And I honestly think had they not been triggered into talking so much about the salary cap, I don't think so many subsequent questions would have related to the salary cap. I don't think so. I do think these things are on reporters' minds, of course. But one thing about Cowboys media is that unless there's something major that happened, they usually do a pretty good job of sticking to the topic and purpose of press conferences and media availability, right? But if you open that door into contracts and free agency and you keep opening the door and you kick the door down, they're like, all right, we're in the room now. The door is open. So this is what we're talking about. We know these questions are relevant to our viewers, listeners, whatever, readers, whatever. So they were like, all right, if that's the path we're going down, that's the path that we're going down. So that was my interpretation of the first few minutes of the press conference. David Moore came out and he was like, all right, I'm going to ask a draft question. And Jerry Jones was like, I'm going to answer a free agency and contract question. And the press conference just kind of kept going with that back and forth from there. I'm going to read a couple of y'all's comments and then we're going to get into, I think, the next question. I kind of tried to mark what questions I wanted to get to. All right, so let's see. Clement says, I feel sorry for the Cowboys social media content creators because they have to deal with our backlash of an organization that is too prideful, stubborn, and arrogant to not hire a GM to add structure to balance the salary cap of which players to resign to extensions and which players to release and test free agency. I think later in the press conference, they kind of hint at why they've been so hesitant to sign or to hire a GM. Not that I think it's a good reason, but I did kind of pick up on, okay, this is kind of how they're looking at the situation, and so we'll get to that later. My 2 cents says the Eagles always find a way to sign their players. Why is it so difficult for us to do the same? Jalen Hurts makes $51 million a year, SMH. That also gets addressed later in this press conference. So let's keep going so we can kind of talk about some of these things that y'all's comments are related to.
Because there wasn't a lot of action in free agency, I know you feel good about your guys. There's more excitement of going into this draft because this is your next chance to improve the roster from last year.
Well, I know that I don't know when I've ever been in a draft that I didn't feel like the players we were drafting are going to be on the field for us and making significant contribution. I don't know that I've ever felt that. But today, you have to have rookies contribute, or you aren't getting the value that you need to have. These are your lesser paid as far as the other relative to veterans. They're going to the good ones are going to get paid to have other days of more pay, but that's got to meld in with the overall management, or it doesn't work. Because you've got 10 players getting 70% of the money. So you've got to have youth and you've got to have those players that fill.
So the follow-up question kind of got him back on track in terms of talking about, what he expects in terms of on-the-field contributions of draft picks. But I think him going back into talking about contracts and players, that is pretty much evidence that Jerry Jones at least at this point, is not in a position to discuss on the field contributions without thinking about contracts. To him, they're one and the same. And I get that the contracts absolutely do impact who's on the roster, who they're able to keep, who they have to let go of, and therefore what's happening on the field. But for whatever reason, they've become so intertwined in Jerry Jones's mind that he literally seems incapable of answering a question that is only about on-field contributions. All right, so from here, I want to skip forward a little bit. I want to get to John Machota's questions about what the message should be to fans who are frustrated with free agency. And I think that's going to kind of start getting into some of the questions that y'all have as well. Of course, when I try to skip ahead, that's when freezing starts to happen again. All right, here we go.
John.
John Machado with The Athletic. Jerry, what's your message to the fan base who's frustrated that you guys haven't done a lot in free agency, that you guys haven't gotten contract extensions done with the key three guys that you want to? What do you say to them? Because you obviously said that you're all in and that you're confident in this roster. What is your message to them?
Well, you can understand there is, I didn't just understand where we are with our cap at the Senior Bowl. That's something we live with and know, like I would understand everything financially around here. And so I think our structure and our involvement at every level that we are in our process of getting personnel is ideal for making good decisions. I know what it's like to make a mistake because I'm going to be living with it 10 years from now. I'm not just in here for a 5-year session at GM and then gone.
Now I'm pausing right here because he's about to get into one of the analogies that he made that kind of went viral on Twitter, where he starts talking about scholarships. So I wanted to pause and make sure that y'all are ready to listen to that. But before I get into that, I want to talk about his answer to this question so far. Mainly because of tone, right? John Machota said, what's your message to fans who are frustrated? And he starts off trying to explain his perspective. But I guess for me, and this could be like a personal taste thing, I feel like when it comes to your message to fans, you want to think about saying something that's encouraging, something that maybe gives them a reason to be excited despite the headlines that they've read and the information that they currently have. And to me, it feels like he didn't take the time at all to think about how fans might feel right now, to think about what it might mean to encourage fans, to think about what would sound encouraging, what would sound exciting, what could give those who still have the capacity to be optimistic, what could help them be optimistic. He went immediately into, let me explain my perspective. And even though he keeps saying he doesn't want to be defensive, he's coming off once again pretty defensive, mainly because of his tone. Yes, his answer based on words alone does explain. And so it's like, if you want fans to understand, and that's your message to fans, hey, I need you to understand this. Okay, based on words alone, you're giving them an explanation. So those who don't understand, maybe they will. But I think it's also, when you're talking about a message that is to fans, it's important to not only think about the information that you're delivering, but how is that information and your delivery and your tone going to make them feel? And I would hope that as the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, at this point, because they seem to be pretty well acquainted with the perspective and the feelings of fans, I would hope that you would find it important and necessary to do something or say something to kind of encourage and motivate fans right now to feel a little bit better about how the next 12 months of this organization are going to look. Hey, what's up, boss? Thanks for hopping in. And yes, I am looking forward to seeing you tonight. I'm getting on the road as soon as I'm done with this. I'm so excited. I'm supposed to already be on the road, y'all, but shit, life happens. All right, so on that note, let's keep going. Jerry Jones is about to go into the scholarship analogy that a lot of y'all, I'm sure, have seen clips of. So listen closely.
So I know what it's like to have to live with how you're doing. That bears on it. With that in mind, I compare this to college and scholarships. And if you had in college a system that allowed you to get better players, if you'd give that one 5 scholarships, let's say you were limited to 30. But you had the ability to get the better players by giving 5 scholarships to that player. Well, you'd know that when you gave them the 5, that was going to limit you. You weren't going to be able to have 30. You were only going to be able to have 26 on your team because you've given away 5 just to get one guy. That's the system that has really made the NFL the game that it is today, because it has created such parity or such opportunity for parity.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and pause right there. And thanks for the notes about the echo, guys. I have an echo in my ear anyway, which I cannot wait until I get to a place where I can have a different setup and maybe that doesn't happen. So sometimes I don't notice when there's extra echo. I appreciate you guys. Hopefully it wasn't too terrible, but I think I fixed it. So that was a scholarship analogy. In so many words, Jerry Jones is comparing the salary cap to having a certain number of scholarships to give out, where you can give out a certain number of scholarships to players you think deserve it, whereas other players might receive fewer scholarships. Now, this is a lot like the pie analogy that a lot of people have heard in the past. It's damn near the same thing, and it doesn't really make much more sense than the pie analogy, especially when you think about the ways that it doesn't apply to the salary cap. And the thing is, even those of us who are not salary cap experts, I don't consider myself a salary cap expert, but I do feel like I know enough about the salary cap to know that it's not quite as simple as a pie or having a certain number of scholarships to hand out. And I understand if you really need to simplify it for the sake of explaining someone who maybe doesn't know what a salary cap is, right? But when you're trying to explain decisions related to the salary cap, decisions related to free agency, and you also have a very well-informed fan base who can see what other teams are doing, it definitely falls short in terms of helping people understand why you're making the decisions that you're making. And unfortunately, I think this was a point for a lot of people where fans started to feel a little bit insulted, because we've heard the pie analogy. And even me not being a Cowboys fan for that long, I've heard enough people talk about the pie analogy and how they feel about the pie analogy to know when it comes to that as an explanation for not making moves, people are not buying it, right? They're not buying it. They don't like hearing it. And so now you've basically got the pie analogy 2.0 that Jerry Jones is trying to sell to the fan base. And so for those who are listening and tweeting live, I could kind of tell this was a point at which people were just like, all right, whatever, like, he better say something good after this, because I'm so done. I'm checking out. I can't believe this is his explanation for what we've been seeing in the offseason. He's trying to make this make sense by talking about giving 5 scholarships to one player and 1 to another. Yeah, I don't know if he just doesn't like explaining in depth or if he thinks most of the fan base won't get it, but there it is. This is a point where a lot of people started to be like, okay, this press conference is not going how I hoped it would go. Well, let's keep going for a little bit before we jump to the next question I want to look at.
And it works. It absolutely works. There's a very reason why we're 24th out of 32 teams draft that we get to pick a player this time, because we were the 24th best in the NFL.
A lot of people really hopped on that point, him saying we're the 24th best. I know what it's like to misspeak and make a mistake, so I'm not going to get on Jerry Jones about that. I get what he was trying to say. I think he just, like, words got confused. He misspoke. It's fine. It's fine.
According to the rules. And so we get to pick, everybody gets to pick before us up to 24. And so that's what we're doing. What that does is effectively create the competition in the game that we have right now. It's called a salary cap. It is not a lack of money under the premise. It's not that at all. It's a part of the rules, just like you can't be offsides, or you can't hit a guy when he's already on the ground, or you can't use your hands at the wrong time on the defensive secondary. Part of the rules of this game is to have a salary cap. And that salary cap means that if you pay Martin more money one year, you're going to have less to pay the next year. That's just part of it that goes, and that's what you've seen. I don't mean to be talking elementary at all, and I'm not. It's just that we know that rule is there and have known it ever since we've been in the salary cap business, that comes, and so it's no mistaking. Sometimes you look at your account, and you're loaded with money in there that day. But you know you've incurred bills that has 3 times the bills that you have money in your account, but that day it looks like you got a lot of money.
So that part was where he actually started to get into what I think is the real reason for the decisions that they've had to make, where he starts saying, you look at your account and it looks like you have a certain amount of money that day, but you know you've got bills coming down the line that are 3 times the amount of what you have in your account. And he kind of refers back to this at a couple of other points that we're going to discuss before I kind of get into my like real in-depth interpretation of that. But I think this is where he kind of starts hinting at, hey, you know, some of the restructuring that we're doing is in an attempt to make a move. But even with the restructuring, we're still having trouble moving how we want to. And so basically saying it without saying it, he's kind of suggesting that maybe there's some dead money that's impacting the team, or maybe some aspects of future contracts or future aspects of current contracts that we haven't really looked at that are concerning to them. And they're not getting specific about it. They're not going into detail, but it's letting us know, hey, it's not the current salary cap that he's worried about. There's something coming down the pipeline that has them a little bit concerned and has them very hesitant when it comes to making what a lot of people would deem necessary moves during the offseason. Let me see if he says anything important after this, or if we should go to the next question.
Well, you've got to be disciplined about spending what's in your account if you know you got all these bills out here. That again is what we're talking about. Now, don't interrupt me.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm teasing him. Go.
No, the thing I would say too is the elephant in the room is was our playoff success, and we could win an off season like we did last year and get an A. Boy, you went and got Cooks, you went and got Gilmore, you signed some veteran players, and boy, you won the off season. But guess what? We didn't get it done in the playoffs. So until we do that.
What was interesting about that statement is that he called the signings of Cooks and Gilmore winning the offseason. And I feel like a lot of people kind of looked at that as an acceptable consolation prize. Those are good players, right? But to a lot of Cowboys fans, especially judging from comments that I saw, not only last year when those transactions happened, but also, once again, as people were watching this live and commenting on it, I don't think a lot of fans looked at that as winning the offseason. That's definitely one of those points where I wish somebody had either asked or he had voluntarily gone into a little bit more detail about why he looked at that as a win. Because I'm just curious his perspective on that and what he deems to be an offseason win, because it's really sounding like what they determined to be winning an offseason is a lot different than what Cowboys fans want to see and what they determined to be winning an offseason.
You could say, well, you signed 2 or 3 or made 2 or 3 trades or 2 or 3 free agents. Until we have the success in the playoffs, that's the biggest question that everybody, is going to ask is, how are you going to get over that hurdle? And we feel like we can do it with this roster. I know Mike feels strongly about our team and what we can get done with it. I don't want to speak for Mike, but, that's the elephant in the room. And, we just feel strongly that because we have had success in the drafts, I think it's pretty well documented. If you have success in the drafts, then you want to keep those players. And so our priorities have been historically, because we've had success in the draft, is to then pay your own. And I know during free agency, because, free agency, that's the focus, then everybody wants to see activity during free agency. Now, when you're talking about big contracts like a Dak, like a CD, like a Micah, those things don't happen overnight. I mean, those things take time. Obviously, there's timing based on what other teams are doing with their players at that position. So there's a lot of moving parts, and certainly you want to get it right. As we mentioned, there's some contracts that you look up and you didn't get right. I mean, that happens to all 32. You make some bets, and because you're dealing with human beings, you're dealing with injury, you're dealing with all the things that go on. Sometimes those contracts don't pan out for you. But when you're paying the type of money, we ultimately will or would have to keep them to a Dak, to a Mike, or a CD. You want to make sure you get it right.
All right. So he said a lot there. And honestly, I think everyone being kind of annoyed at the scholarship analogy kind of distracted from what Stephen Jones was saying here. Because if you really listen to what he's saying and you think about the question that he's answering and the meaning behind his statements, you start to kind of put together the true reason why they've been so hesitant. And the reason I keep saying the true reason is because I've been seeing all sorts of things from fans about whether it's they question whether or not the Joneses understand the salary cap, or if the Joneses actually want to win a Super Bowl, or if they think fans are stupid, or if they're trying to sabotage Mike McCarthy or Dak and all of this. But one of the first significant things that he said, in my opinion, was when he said, when he was talking earlier in his statement about doing well in the draft and wanting to sign those players. And then shortly after that, he starts talking about the fact that sometimes you end up making bad deals, right? So the way he flowed from one topic to another, to me, tells me those things are connected in his mind. Because he looks at it as, okay, if we win in the draft and we can keep the players that we won in the draft from drafting so well, we should be okay. In theory, he's absolutely correct. But he's also reflecting on the fact that they weren't able to keep all of those players. And it sounds like they either weren't able to keep as many players as they truly wanted to, or they weren't able to keep them on the type of deals that they wanted to. And so there are some things that, when it comes to after the draft, re-signing the players, doing certain things in the offseason, there are some things that haven't gone according to plan that have impacted them and the way they make decisions more than we realize. Now, I'm going to try to pull up this tweet that I sent out because, actually, I'll pull it up on my phone. It might be easier to read from. Because Stargazer made a comment about this, and I responded to it. And I just feel like it's easier to read what I said than to try to remember off the top of my head what I said. Scrolling. Okay, so I'll read Star's post first. She said, Jerry and Steven answered a lot of questions today, LOL. The answers just pissed the fan base off. Not wrong. She goes on, question, why y'all waiting so long to extend the big three? Answer, we like to wait till after others of the same position get paid to ensure we don't overpay. Question, you aren't worried about the price going up? Answer, nope, we'd rather wait and get it right than overpay and miss out on being able to sign other players in the future because of a bad contract. Question, why don't you be more aggressive in free agency? Answer, because we rather have 2 or 3 players on the roster of a certain position than pay one great player, which is the section we haven't gotten to. Question, why? Answer, because you get more bang for your buck. 3 good equals 1 great, and it works out better as far as being available when we need you. We haven't gotten to the section where Jerry starts talking about how 3 players is better than 1. But this wasn't a terrible summary of the press conference that Star posted. And so my response was, what I got from them wanting to wait is that they don't want to be the reason the price goes up. When Steven started talking about how agents talk to each other and they all have big numbers in mind, it definitely came off to me like they know prices will go up regardless. So they'll let other franchises do their negotiating into what they think is reasonable, and then they will just kind of deal with whatever happens. On the flip side, if they go first, they get blamed if the higher prices backfire, like what happened with Zeke, who was also mentioned during this press conference. It happened with running backs, and before that, the Cowboys became one of the reasons, supposedly, for implementing a salary cap in the first place. So the reason why I mentioned that was because if you study how the current salary cap came into place, right, there's a lot that's happened in terms of the evolution of player acquisition in the NFL and how the draft came to be and free agency and the salary cap. But shortly after, and by shortly I mean within a few years of when Jerry Jones became owner of the Dallas Cowboys, there was a lot of movement in terms of what free agency looked like and the implementation of the salary cap. So before the salary cap was implemented, the Cowboys, one, because modern free agency and the salary cap were implemented very close to each other. So one, the Cowboys were able to really hold on to a lot of the players that they wanted to hold on to without fear of them negotiating with a lot of other teams. And also, when it came to saying, hey, I want to keep this player, they could pay whatever they wanted. So when Jerry Jones was talking about how the salary cap has led to parity in the NFL, he wasn't wrong at all. And if anybody should be aware of that, it should be him. Because when people talked about the need for parity, Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys were exactly what they pointed to. Not every article mentioned them by name, but if you go back and look at articles, say from like 92 to 95, from when they were talking about a salary cap and then it was implemented and they talked about the impact of it, a lot of mentions of Jerry Jones and how the Dallas Cowboys could just pay whoever came up. So Jerry is very familiar with the fact that the salary cap was implemented in order to create parity within the NFL, right? And for the most part, it has. It's created a situation, at least, where it's harder for all of the talent to be divvied up among just a few different teams, right? However, the salary cap isn't as simple as kind of what Jerry Jones was saying. Oh, you have a certain number of scholarships and you send them out. So while he is right on one hand, on the other side, there are certain things that go along with the salary cap and negotiating the salary cap and finessing the salary cap that fans still want to see. And I think in their attempts to do that, they've messed up a few times. And I think that's what Stephen Jones was referring to. And so in certain cases, when it comes to the less popular players, they're willing to take that risk. I think they feel like there's less room for error, right? And that's why sometimes we see these signings during the offseason that fans are like, why did we really feel the need to sign that guy? Why did we feel the need to extend this person? Like, what is going on? But when it comes to these more well-known players who are anticipated to get really big numbers, maybe reset the market, they don't want it to be on them. They've been through that before when it came to the implementation of the salary cap. They went through it when it came to people feeling like they overpaid Zeke and messed up the running back market for a while. And they're like, all right, we're out of that business. If somebody's going to reset the market, it won't be us. And if that means we pay more than what we would have originally paid by doing this a few months earlier, so be it. They just don't want it to be their fault that all of a sudden players are being paid tens of millions of dollars more than what a lot of owners think they should be being paid. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more when Steven goes into owners talking about each other, because a lot of people honed in on the fact that Steven talked about agents talking to each other, but he also talked about owners talking to each other. And I think both sides of that coin are significant. Hey, thanks for popping in, Law. Law says the two things can be true argument. Absolutely. That comes into play so often, especially in this press conference and with them talking about the free agency moves they have or haven't made. All right. So from there, I want to jump to, since we're kind of on the topic, let's jump to Jane's question, which is Calvin Watkins asked a good question in the middle of this press conference about embracing draft and develop. I'm not going to play all of it. I'm going to play part of it because there is another quote in there that I think is significant. And then we're going to jump to Jane's question, which is a few minutes after that. So Calvin's question was about, 21 minutes into the conversation.
In the world and getting to be here, sitting here explaining to you what we're doing. So this isn't the world's smallest violin sitting up here complaining or talking for our fans. I just want to try to be good enough to work through this and us have a winning season, which we got a chance to have.
Calvin.
Dallas Morning News. This is for Jerry and Steven. When did you guys fully embrace this philosophy of draft and develop? Because you guys have signed big-time free agents in the past before.
You embrace draft and develop when you draft well. I mean, you start to embrace it when you have the success, that we've had as an organization. The coaches that have been doing the developing, that play them, that have the confidence to play these players right away, and then you develop them and they have success. I mean, we hadn't brought him up, but Diggs is paid. He's one of the top corners in the league, and he's a guy that we picked and Mike and his staff developed. Terrence Steele was a college free agent from Texas Tech. Part of the draft process, our philosophy on going out and getting our top priority free agents, but when you have success, you embrace that in terms of the type of players that you're getting your hands on.
So his answer to this is another example to me of how they'll take any particular question and, at least for them in their minds, paying players, taking care of player contracts and free agency gets intertwined. Because the question was about draft and develop. When did you embrace draft and develop, right? And so talking about keeping a player like Trayvon Diggs and using him as an example makes sense. But honestly, where does the comment about him being one of the highest paid corners in the league really come in when it comes to answering that question? Does paying Trayvon Diggs have a lot of money really relate to the concept of draft and develop? To some people might, to some people it might not. But to Stephen Jones, it definitely does. And I don't know. It's kind of like in my own mind, I'm still debating whether or not I feel like this is a good or bad thing. Because while I do understand it is a fact that all these things are related, right? I do think that it's significant and something that we can't look past. The fact that the Joneses literally can't talk about one thing without talking about the other thing. They can't talk about their players on the field without talking about the contracts and the negotiations that are happening off the field. So while they are connected, and this is a question that y'all can answer in the chat. While they are connected in such a way that every answer should go back to money and contracts and free agency? Do y'all think that actually makes sense? Or do y'all think that the connection in the minds of the Joneses is just a little bit too close of a connection right now? I'm going to keep going. Well, let's see if any of y'all give me a response in the chat.
Flip side of that is we've had some success, looking for the right veterans to bring in a Malik Hooker, who we really liked in the draft. And now he's become a foundational type player for us back there at safety. And, he was a top 15, top 12 player on our board. That's why we brought him in here. We had patience with his injury issues, and he's turned into one of our better players on the roster. We think those things can happen. You just have to keep grinding, keep looking for the right players to bring in here that give you some opportunity to bring some guys along in a system we have. We think Zim's going to do a great job with these players. Hats off to Dan. He had a great run here, but I think Zim's going to bring an edge. It was something Mike wanted in terms of bringing Zim in. He thought we needed, that edge there, and I think he's going to bring that to this defense and bring some guys along that I think will really help us out in terms of where we came up a little short, stopping the run, that type of deal, in our big games and the playoff game.
So once again, kind of like in the beginning of this press conference, right? We see an example where Stephen Jones starts off answering the question in a way that makes sense, kind of deviates into the topic of contracts and money, and then gets back on track in terms of answering the question more directly. However, Jerry finds it a little bit harder to help himself and stay as close to the topic at hand as Stephen does. So Jerry decides to add on to this answer, and he once again goes into the scholarship analogy.
We have embraced running out of cap room, just as we embraced using it when we had it.
So nobody asked about them running out of cap room. The question was about embracing draft and develop. Yeah, somehow the idea of draft and develop for Jerry Jones is connected to running out of cap room.
So you embrace a lot about where you are. Now, the mistake would be not to be looking around the corner ahead and understanding 2 and 3 years out where you're going to be. But you use the word embrace. You embrace
He did say the word embrace, but not salary cap.
it when you've recognized that you've spent 4 scholarships on that player, he's gone, and you borrowed it out of this year, and so you only have 25 scholarships to work with. That'll cause you to embrace it right there. And that dictates timing, but I don't want to imply that it's just all of a sudden wake up this morning and it's here. No, it's been known and you plan it for quite some time. Everybody that's ever run a business really gets that. They get that. And so they plan ahead. They look around corners. You have to. You have to. Now, you've got some ambiguousness in what we do.
All right, we don't really need to listen to the rest of that. But yeah, this salary cap situation has Jerry Jones so stressed out he can't talk about nothing else. But I will tell you what I got from that. The question was about embracing draft and develop. He talked about embracing running out of cap room. And it sounded like from his answer, what he was trying to say was that the idea of drafting and developing is his way or their way of trying to get out of this situation where they keep running out of cap room. Now I'm going to go over Jane's question, and then I think that's the point at which I'll be able to talk about some of the information I started looking into after watching this press conference. So Jane's question was just a few minutes after this. We're not skipping too much by going straight to it. But once you hear it, I think you'll understand why so much of Cowboys Nation was excited about her kind of getting to the point.
It's right around the corner.
Jane.
Jane Slater, NFL Network. Trust me, I get budgeting. I've been working on it over the years. But my job is to explain to fans, friends, and family who don't understand when you've got these 3 free agents, particularly Dak. We've seen in the past, I don't think us covering this team are surprised that a deal hasn't gotten done. And typically they don't get done until training camp. But why not work on those deals earlier so that you have the flexibility to go get those veterans that have led to success in the last 2 postseasons?
Your problem is that
I'm not gonna lie, when he said your problem, my eyebrows was like, what? It's like, your problem, okay.
Well, I'm answering your question, but you don't have many problems. I really, you're excellent. But the point is that
Nice backtrack.
you may be working on it and not moving anything but your eyebrows. Who in the world would think that we're not working on it? I work on it. It pops open at 2 in the morning sometimes.
I believe it.
What your actually question is why don't you have something done and negotiated and put in the drawer? Well, we'd like to see some more leaves fall. We'd like to see some more action. It's called option. A lot of guys need to hand it off. First guy through the line. Another one will keep it another step, decide whether to pitch it or not. He'll decide whether to turn upfield with it, and then he's still got a pitch left. So it's called option quarterback. That's working the problem. That's working the problem. I've spent my life being an option quarterback, and I can go right out to the damn sideline and still leave a pitch in me. So I can do that, and that's just a style that you have. And so you never know. You might give money to somebody that you shouldn't have given it to. You got 2 or 3 of those names around here for me? I've been reading about them all week. So I know they're out there. I shouldn't have handed it off as quick. Should have gone on out and seen a few more.
Okay, so although I'm not a fan of this analogy at all, this is Jerry Jones' admission of making some mistakes with some prior contracts. Now, which ones he's thinking of specifically, I'm not sure. And what's the impact of those contracts? I'm not sure of that either. I don't want to speculate and put that many words in Jerry Jones' mouth. But I can see how if you've made a mistake a few times, when it comes to a situation where the risk is greater or the money on the table or the money at stake is a little bit of a higher amount, and you're dealing with a salary cap, that seems to really bother Jerry Jones, which I get it. It's just like, if you are the most valuable sports franchise in the world, I'm sure there's a part of you that wants to be able to use some piece of that superlative in order to improve your roster, as opposed to being held to the same expectations and limitations as other NFL franchises that aren't doing what you're doing in terms of bringing in revenue. I can understand that. But regardless, the situation is what it is. And it seems to really bother Jerry Jones. And that, on top of the fact that he's made some mistakes within that system, seem to make him very, very hesitant when it comes to some of the more well-known players on our team.
I see some more defense before I either pitched it or kept it. So to say that you're not working on it and going is not the right answer. What they differ with you is your style. Because it's on your mind. It'd be madness not to know that the contracts are ahead. I want to see a few more cards played, candidly. If you got trouble with when the timing is around here, it's because I'm not ready to go.
And you don't worry about those numbers going up as a result of other teams paying some of these players at their positions?
I worry about, if you're asking me, do I worry about things going up? Not worry, but I probably have as good a feel as anybody living on this earth what the cap is going to be 3 years from now and 4 years from now, 5 years from now. I really do. We've got exceptional insight into where the cap is going to be, more so than a lot of people.
Jane, I can assure you, if we felt like we could get a number that was a good number, because unfortunately these, as we all.
I like this view, reminding us that Mike McCarthy is still there. Quick side note about Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy has the demeanor of a guy who was just going along to get along at this point. I think last year we heard a lot from Mike McCarthy, and this year he's just like, look, I'm going to just show up, coach his team, whatever happens, happens. I'm like, whatever. And it's like, we know that he doesn't plan to retire or anything, right? He just hired a new agent. So it's not like he's done, but something about his demeanor says that he might be done with the Cowboys. Now, going into what Jerry Jones was talking about, actually, I think I want to let Steven talk a little bit before I actually directly address what Jerry Jones was saying. And let me look at y'all's comments real quick. Clement says, action is referred to one of the members in the group. Oh, you're answering somebody's question. Never mind. Michael D says, first mistake was putting Steven in charge, and Clement agrees. Y'all are hilarious. But yeah, I do think that the admission of maybe making some mistakes with past contracts is a little bit more significant than the credit people are giving it for. But let's get a little bit into Steven's statement, and then we'll talk about that a little bit more.
No representatives talk to each other. You don't think the representatives of Jefferson and CD and Chase aren't talking? And you don't think they got their eye on something really big? Please. I mean, they're not ready to come in here. Same thing with Micah, and same thing with Dak. I mean, it's just it's a little cat and mouse. Total respect for him.
Why not get ahead of that then, if you know what some of those big numbers might be?
Well, you don't know what those big numbers might be. And as I said, if you really, your gut feel was, if Jerry's gut feel was that was a good number, then you would do it.
You're say get ahead of it as though you knew the answer. And one reason you're not doing it is you may not have the answer. You may really need to see if there's more cap room. You might need to see if you're going to get somebody else signed. Or you really right then might not even have the money under the cap, of course. So I guess what I'm trying to say is it's timing. Timing is obviously as important as the principal amount. And sometimes timing keeps you from making a mistake. And that's not just football. That's not just a salary cap. That's any decisions that you've got to have some ambiguity up to a bright line. The bright line's when it's done or gets done. And of course, in all due respect, the players, coaches, commissioners, everybody's listening to their music too when you start talking about this thing called pay. Okay? Sponsors, we all look at those things. So it's not boy, they should have done that last week because the price of tea in China went up. It's not the way you do it, frankly. Certainly not the way we do it, and I've seen criticism about that we wait too long to sign players or those kinds of things. They certainly can look back and say, if they'd have done it 5 years ago, then price of living was much down then. Okay, well, that might be the case, but we might have been waiting to see how a couple of players played and whether or not we want to keep them or not. Again, no decision is singularly based on that decision, just that scope, that person, that pay. Because of the nature of the cap, it affects everybody down the line.
All right, I'm going to pause it right there because I think that he said two things that are very, very significant. So actually, let me bring myself up on the screen because this is important. Okay. So at one point, he said, timing can keep you from making a mistake, right? Which lets us know what? He's afraid of making a mistake. That's why he's on the timing that he's on. He doesn't feel like he's waiting too long. He doesn't feel like he's dragging his feet. He doesn't feel like he's, well, at least based on these statements, it doesn't seem like he feels like he's doing anything wrong by the players. He said, timing can keep you from making a mistake. And then towards the end of the last statement that we just saw, he starts talking about the ripple effect. He starts talking about the fact that paying one person doesn't just affect that one person. And in that aspect, he's right. Now, I want to respond to what some of y'all are saying in the chat about not knowing the salary cap numbers, right? A lot of the salary cap is based on the media rights deals of the NFL and maybe potentially some other deals and some other things that are coming down the pipeline. So, for example, I recently did a video about the potential merger between the NFL, ESPN, and Disney, right? No. It was, NFL, ESPN, and Disney. So I think when you think about things like that potentially happening and having maybe like an inside track on the likelihood of whether they'll happen and how they'll happen if they do happen. So for example, there was speculation that it might be an equity deal, which is something that would have to be worked out in the CBA in order for players to basically not be screwed over in a deal like that, right? So having an inside track on things like that, on what certain networks and media platforms are thinking about in terms of media rights. For example, it seems like the NFL, they're putting more and more games overseas. They're doing more and more in terms of putting games on streaming platforms. If you know what that indicates in terms of future plans, future revenue, future media rights deals, things of that nature, then yeah, he really might literally have more insight on the salary cap and what's going to happen with it than anybody else. That might be true. So while we're talking about Google and predictions that we can find online, he might have information that the people making those predictions are not privy to. This is just speculation. I'm just offering an alternate perspective, right? Jerry might not have been lying when he said that, all right? Now here's how that ties in with what he said about how paying one person, well, my 2 cents, that is why you hire a GM, but if he's privy to things like that, some of those things might be things that he can't share with the GM. These might be things that he knows because of personal connections and because of his position as owner of the Dallas Cowboys, but that he's not supposed to share with certain people down the chain. That is possible. Sometimes certain people get invited to meetings and they sign NDAs, or they're just expected to not share information, even with their GM. And their GM is just expected to do the best they can with the information that they have. That's why I said they kind of started insinuating why they're so hesitant to hire a GM. When they start talking about, oh, we have insight into this, and people are talking about this, and agents talk, and owners talk, and yada, 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 to me, and like I said, this is speculation, this is an alternate perspective, but to me, it almost felt like they were saying without saying, we have information other people don't have. We're doing our best to use that information to make the best decisions for the team. We don't want to get this wrong. So in order for us to process this information and apply it properly, it's going to take a little bit more time than y'all want it to take. But just try to trust us on this. Now, if you don't trust them on that, I don't blame you. They haven't really given us a reason to trust them. And it might be some time before we actually see the fruits of their labor, and maybe not. Because by their own admission, they've made a lot of mistakes, right? So even with the information they have and the conversations they're having, it sounds like they're still making mistakes. And maybe that's the fear. Maybe they're like, okay, with all the information that we have and the people that we have access to, we're still getting this wrong sometimes. And so maybe from that aspect, those of us, because my 2 cents, I'm with you. I would love to see them hire a GM. But from that aspect, they would be smart to hire a GM anyway. Like, yo, all your inside information is not doing you any good. All your conversations and your insight into the future of the salary cap doesn't seem to be doing you any good. But I do feel like both perspectives are worth examining, especially in light of what he's saying about how paying one person doesn't affect just that one person. So I think it's not just a matter of, like, a lot of us are talking about, like, well, you don't want to see the price go up, because what we're thinking about, okay, is one, secure these players, get these extensions done. These are players that we know we want to see on the Dallas Cowboys in the future, but also let's do that while leaving room under the salary cap to add other good players and to extend other players and to give them good deals, right? That's what everybody wants to see. But I think what the Joneses are thinking about is, if we say a certain number for a quarterback or a defensive end or a wide receiver, that could potentially reset the market, and it could have a negative impact on other franchises, and then we get blamed for it, like we were blamed with Ezekiel Elliott, who they brought up at the beginning of the press conference. And I think that's why they brought it up. I think that's one of the things that is concerning them at this point, that may happen again, but with another position. Because think about it. They talked about agents talking to each other. What I think might be happening is that there are some agents who are looking at the Dallas Cowboys and who are looking at the Joneses with the understanding that their franchise is more valuable than any other NFL franchise, and saying, okay, because of that, because of your personal net worth, because of the value of your franchise, you look at money differently than these other owners look at money anyway. If I can manipulate you into paying player X a higher amount than any other owner is willing to pay them, it's going to put pressure on them to pay a higher amount than what they're throwing out right now. So without giving anything away, without letting you know what other owners are talking about, let's try to get you to go first, because you'll probably throw out the highest number if you don't have information about what other people are thinking, right? And so the Joneses are like, and they've said this in the press conference. They've said, we don't want to make a mistake. They've said, we don't want to have bad deals take place. So it's not like I'm making this up. This is something they're saying. And it sounds like they're saying, hey, we would rather wait and take too long than to end up resetting the market in a way that negatively impacts the rest of the league, the way we did with Ezekiel Elliott and running backs. Because the pay of running backs also impacted the pay of wide receivers, which impacted the pay of quarterbacks, which could potentially impact the pay of coaches and staff, is what Jerry is saying. So he's like, before we start throwing money around and doing that and people blame us for that, I'm going to let them go first. We're going to watch other leaves fall. We're going to watch other moves get made before we end up being the ones to make that mistake. And with it being that that's happened to them in the past, while I'm not a fan of it, I can understand their perspective on that, All right. I'm gonna keep going while I look at my notes and see if there's any other questions that I want to get to in this particular press conference because we're approaching an hour and a half.
So that has a big bearing on it too.
Nick?
Nick Harris, DallasCowboys.com. A couple of questions. First, a handful of picks that you guys are missing in the middle rounds. Is there more of an intrigue to potentially get on the phone and trade back if your guy's not there at 24?
Well, I'll say
All right, not that that's not a good question, but we're running out of time. So I'm going to fast forward to the question at the end where he talked about Dak. If you have time to go back and look at the press conference on your own, I definitely recommend doing that if you're a Cowboys fan who likes to stay informed. We're going to go to about here.
he's dedicated in his practice and he's sound physically. And so that puts him really right there at the top as far as a player. So I'm trying to answer your question. I guess the answer is, without saying any more, I think he's one of the top players in the NFL.
Patrick?
A couple questions. First question is for all three of you guys, whichever one wants to chime in. You mentioned, Mike, about the importance and the value of the center position, obviously, as it relates to looking at left tackle. Going into this particular draft, obviously offensive line could be viewed as a need for you guys, but you have the flexibility of Tyler Smith as well. So if you're on the clock and your top available tackle prospect is there versus your top available center prospect, how does the flexibility of Tyler Smith versus where you as a coach would like Tyler Smith to play, how does that go into the decision?
I mean, I think the biggest thing is, you got to take the best player, the best value. That's why we have the draft process. Tyler's flexibility gives us, something unique to have. The fact that he's started at both positions at such a young age is pretty special. But I look at these players, just say the offensive line room, which player, regardless of the position, do they make the offensive line room better? And I have great confidence in our process that if we do select one high, that they'll make the offensive line room better, and then we'll figure it out. Because if we had to go play a game today, we'd be able to. Where Tyler would line up would probably be a guard or maybe tackle. Tell you like that answer. But that's just the reality of where we are, and that's where, and I get the paper championships that are won in the spring, and you try to fill up your roster. If you lose a Tony, you're supposed to replace it with another guy. That's just not the reality of how this thing works. So I just think we just need to just stay true to our board, and whoever we add in any of those position rooms, especially offensive line room, will make us better.
That wasn't the question that I intended to go to, but I'm kind of glad that's where I landed. Because I think it does give us some insight into what they're thinking about in terms of the draft. Throughout this press conference, they mentioned the offensive line a few times. So for anybody who, like me, was hoping that they'd pick O-line in the first round, it sounds like it's highly likely, based on what they're portraying to be their sense of urgency when it comes to the O-line, sounds like it's highly likely that's going to happen. So yay in advance. Hopefully that turns out to still be true once all the cards are played. But I also like the fact that Mike McCarthy talked about the need for flexibility and basically evaluating things once the draft is over, because I think a lot of people have been looking for the team to replace certain pieces that have been lost. And he, in so many words, is basically saying, hey, and a lot of us have said this, the Cowboys don't have enough draft picks to fill the holes on the roster. And so he's like, hey, we might not fill up everything hole for hole. Like, we might not do replace someone we lost with someone that we're drafting or someone that we pick up in free agency. It might not be tit for tat that way, but we are going to look at what we need in order to create a complete roster that's capable of having a winning season. And at the end of the day, that's, I think, considering the constraints that they're under, in the sense that, it's not like you can go in and bid on players in the draft. You have to go in order. Same thing in free agency. There are only certain players that you can talk to. There's only a certain amount of money that you can spend. And so Mike McCarthy is basically saying, hey, forget all the speculation. All you need to know is we're going to do the best that we can. And for those of you in the chat saying Mike McCarthy looks checked out, I do kind of agree. I don't think he's so checked out that he's going to phone it in on the season. But I do think in terms of going above and beyond and being super extra, especially in terms of his answers to the media and explaining himself, I do think he's kind of over that aspect of his job. But I think the next question is where Nosi asks about Dak, and we get the "we want Dak Prescott" answer from Jerry Jones.
For Jerry and Stephen, both of you guys have spoken obviously favorably about Dak Prescott. Stephen, a few weeks ago, you said that you still see that there is improvement, that a ceiling that Dak hasn't hit yet, which is promising because it shows he has more room to grow. Jerry, when you asked about potentially drafting a quarterback, you said, I'll quote, "they could be the best thing since ice cream." Can kind of bet on the Cowboys not taking him in the first round. How do you guys balance knowing the value and knowing that you want Dak Prescott here for the future, also knowing that you gave up a fourth-round pick to get Trey Lance in to develop, with potentially a scenario where a high-priority quarterback is staring you in the face?
I'll start it. We want Dak Prescott. So that's that. And there's no question that Mike's focus, not that he didn't have focus, but how he improved last year, and I give Mike a lot of the credit for it. That improvement demonstrated to me there's more as far as ultimately winning what we're trying to do here. So your question nails it for me. We want Dak, and we think that there's room for growth. He is absolutely unsurpassed as far as what he is as an individual, his work ethic, what he brings in the leadership, everything about what you would think about as quarterback. And so he's got that. He's had a few hits, but everybody else has too. And so then you get into the $64,000 question, and that is with all of the risks that's involved and what have you, if you look around the league, the teams that have really made that big-time commitment we have in light of where we have committed in the past. We have that to add to whatever we do with him. And so it's a double whammy. We've got a lot still from seasons past that we have to add to that. And so all of that presents a challenge. This wouldn't even...
So I'm going to pause right there for a second because I want to make note of what he just said. He starts off by saying, we want Dak Prescott, and that's that. Obviously, that's not that. Like, I would love to own a condo in downtown Austin, but I don't have the money for that. So just saying that you want something, and that can be applied to anything, there's more to getting something than simply saying that you want it. What are you willing to do to get it? What are you willing to pay to have it? Does that thing want you? All these all these questions come into play when it comes to saying that you want something and then actually getting it. But then as he begins elaborating on that answer, one of the things that he says that we heard towards the end there was he starts talking about how, there's a double whammy because they have to take things from the past and add it to what they're giving him. In other words, this is like the second reference to something suggesting that there's something that happened in terms of past contracts or dead money or something that is impacting their ability to negotiate the way that they want to right now. So let's keep going, and then we'll dive into that a little bit more.
You wouldn't even have a response if we were in a different place relative to the cap. If you are a team that has a lot of cap room, and then you have a quarterback for a little while that is well underneath in his rookie contract, San Francisco last year, us with Dak early, after we had Romo, and boy, we had a lot of credit card use there on Romo. Well, Dak came along, so we didn't have to have it, and so we were able to absorb that money and still keep talent around him. So Dak has enjoyed in his career that we're proud of, some of the best supporting cast that you could put around him. And to move forward, we're going to have to diminish that. That's a fact. That's the rules. And so that's our challenge, and to make it work out. Dak, quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, I can't even blink on that one.
Last one, Garrett.
So he said, moving forward, we're going to have to diminish that, referring to the talent that they put around Dak Prescott. And I tried to hold on to my sensibility and optimism as I listened to that press conference, but that was the part at which I was just like, wow, you're really saying out loud that you can't afford to put talent around Dak Prescott. And I understand that not every team's situation is as similar as it may seem, but I don't know. Something just tells me there's got to be somebody that they can hire or talk to that can help them out of this situation. And by this situation, I mean, whatever it is that's happening that he keeps referring to, where he talks about decisions from the past impacting what's currently happening with their negotiations and their ability to pay people. Now, I'm not a salary cap expert. I'm not going to pretend to be. There are people who are way better at that than I am. So even though I thought about looking and being like, okay, what are the Cowboys dealing with in terms of dead money? I was like, nah, that's going to take me too long. What I did find, however, was an article by one KD Drummond, who I follow on Twitter. You should check him out. And it was written last year in February of 2023, where he made a reference to the salary cap. So it's an article titled "A Look into the Cowboys' Dead Money in 2023." And at that time, in a section of the article called Big Money Short List, he said, Dallas currently has just 2 players on their 2023 dead money list, and one is taking up 97% of that figure. Last offseason, Dallas released right tackle Lyle Collins. Collins had rubbed many in the organization the wrong way over several seasons. The player who Jerry Jones wooed as an undrafted free agent had questionable injury concerns, and the final straw was when he was suspended for trying to bribe an NFL urine sample collector. Not only that, but he then tried to challenge a 2-game suspension that was pushed to 5 games. Collins was replaced by Terrence Steele, and after Dallas failed to find a trade partner, they cut Collins loose. The result, $4.9 million of dead money on the 2022 ledger, and a whopping $8.4 million on the 2023 ledger. And then he talks about a couple of other things, and he says Ridgeway adds another $181,000 to the dead money total. And then I found this other article. This one was written earlier this year by Todd Archer for ABC News. And he said, from 2017 to 2023, dead money accounted for anywhere from 8 to 18.2% of the Cowboys cap per roster management system data. On a projected 2025 cap of $270 million, that dead money figure could be between 22 and 37%, making it difficult for them to retain or add players. So even though Jerry Jones said it's a $64 million question referring to Dak Prescott, I actually think it's the 37% question. In other words, how did you end up in a position where you might have 37% of your 2025 salary cap being taken up by dead money to the point where now you need to pay players who are integral to the success of your team and you can't? So naturally, stuff like that, neither Jerry Jones nor Stephen Jones would state that explicitly during a press conference, because once you do, you're going to be asked more questions about it. And if you already feel like you've made mistakes, and you feel haunted to the point where you can't answer a single question without bringing up free agency and contract talks and salary cap space, then the last thing you want to do is sit there in a room full of people who are literally trained to ask good questions and have to explain how you ended up in that position in the first place, and have them ask you why you made certain deals, why you cut certain people, why you made certain decisions, why contracts were negotiated in such a way to end up with that much dead money in the first place. But to me, once I read that, assuming those numbers are accurate, that pretty much answered the question for me. 22 to 37%, you guys, that is bananas. So while he might say we want Dak Prescott, he also said they're dealing with certain things from the past that they're having to pay for. That's what he said in so many words. That it's gotten to the point pretty much where they can't keep kicking the can down the road, where they can't keep putting things on the proverbial credit card that he referred to. And if they're dealing with that much dead money, like that's not even something that they can restructure or renegotiate because those people are gone. So it's not like they can go and be like, "Hey, can we renegotiate this debt money?" Like, no, that's not really an option. It's done. T Jack says 100% cap mismanagement. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so considering that, that's what makes me actually have like, while I understand conceptually why you're taking your time with paying people, why you're having trouble paying people, it's what makes me have an even bigger problem with them bringing up things like the pie analogy, like the scholarship analogy, when them referring to the amount of money Dak Prescott takes up on the salary cap, when we know for certain, based on numbers that have been put out there by the press, that a big part of your issue is the bad deals that you've made in the past. That it's not about what Dak Prescott's current hit to the salary cap is. It has a lot to do with the deals that you've made in the past and what you referred to yourself, Jerry and Stephen Jones, as mistakes during this press conference. So for me, that was the biggest takeaway. I tuned into this press conference hoping to get insight into what they were looking to do in the draft, and we got a little bit of insight. I definitely see the O-line as a concern. They definitely see the center position as a concern. It sounds like they feel like they have a little bit more flexibility currently at guard and tackle. So do with that information what you will. Respond to that statement however you like. So we did get a little bit of that, and we got some of the perspective of Mike McCarthy in terms of what he's looking for position-wise, that he might not necessarily be looking to replace what he lost in terms of certain positions, that they might be like looking for people who can contribute to the team in a certain way. Valuable info. But I feel like the biggest takeaway from this press conference, especially looking into some of the statements that were made, especially learning this little nugget about dead money, I think the biggest takeaway is that the Joneses have made mistakes in the past. They've made mistakes that they still have to pay for. And the way those situations played out is making them hesitant to move the way a lot of people would like to see them move right now. So, doesn't sound like they're hiring a GM anytime soon. Sounds like they could use, even if not a general manager, it sounds like they could use some sort of consultant or something to help them, because even if you're prepared to no longer kick the can down the road, if it turns out that you are looking at 22 to 37% of your salary cap in 2025 being taken up by dead money, somebody needs to help you sort that out. I can't imagine many teams having to deal with that and just being okay. So if you're a Cowboys fan and you're listening, buckle up and be ready for some of the roster decisions that are going to be made in light of that. And otherwise, let's just hope that they miraculously figure out a way to figure that out. It's going to take some players. Like, when we talk about team-friendly deals, I think sometimes we think about the present and people signing a deal that's going to help current players also get what they're worth. But to manage this situation, you would have to have players who are so loyal that they're willing to sign a deal that is so team-friendly, they are retroactively making up for past deals that the Joneses have done with other people that have resulted in a lot of dead money. So yeah, that's that. That's pretty much all I have. And just a little bit more insight. The information about the dead money came from an article titled "Sources: Cowboys Rework Zach Martin's Contract and Free Cap Space." That was written by Todd Archer for ABC News on March 8th, if anybody wants to look that up for themselves. A couple of the other nuggets that he put in there, he said, without the additional non-voidable years on the contract, the dead money in his deal, should he not play for the Cowboys after this season, would have been close to $25 million. Before redoing Martin's contract, the Cowboys were looking at about $60 million in dead money against the 2025 cap with the expiring contracts of Martin, DeMarcus Lawrence, Brandon Cooks, and Dak Prescott. A potential release of Michael Gallup could add more than $8 million in dead money against the cap next year. So, Todd Archer goes a little bit in depth about just the high amounts of dead money that they're dealing with, which players it's applying to. And if you're one of those salary cap gurus who likes digging into that, and I don't know, maybe I'll get Professor O on to talk about that, because I do want to talk a little bit more about it and learn a little bit more about it, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm right now an expert. But yeah, it sounds like they've got a few deals that have resulted in a lot of dead money, and it looks like they are trying to get ahead of some of them and rework them and renegotiate them. But yeah, we're looking at potentially millions and millions of dollars in dead money that it sounds like they are very, very wary of. All right. Anyway, that's all I got for now. As y'all saw, Law and Boss popped into the chat. I'm going to be seeing them later on tonight. I'm about to get on the road as soon as I hop off of here and go to meet them. I had planned to already be in the DFW area right now, but hey, stuff happens. But stuff happens that I can learn and go from. And so, although this day hasn't gone according to plan, I'm super excited about hanging out with those guys tonight. I'm super excited about some of the things that are related to the reasons why I didn't get on the road this morning, and announcements that I hope to be able to make to y'all very, very soon. So yeah, just be on the lookout, obviously on Twitter, for any pictures or videos that we might share, maybe some impromptu content. And I'm really not sure how this live broadcast of Laws is going to go. I'm just going to be there and enjoy networking and talking to people and celebrating the next moves of this team that we love so much. So on that note, thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks everybody for being active in the chat. If you could do me a favor, hit the like button before you leave. Subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. Share this content with anyone who you think might like it, and turn those notifications on so next time I go live, you'll be one of the first to know. With that being said, y'all enjoy your draft day and all the fire content that's out there. I'm Jazz Monet, and I'm out.